KPBS On Demand is supported by Latino Legacy Foundation, presenting their Storyteller series, Reach for the Stars with Ellen Ochoa, the first Latina astronaut. Welcome Serenade by the all-female mariachi Amapolas, Sunday, June 29th. More at latinolegacyfoundation.org.
You shall pay, Black Prince. I curse you with my name. You shall be Blackula. Blackula.
Blackula rises from the grave yet again, and just in time for Black History Month. Welcome back to listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie. I'm Beth Accomando. Writer Rodney Barnes has resurrected William Marshall's vampire from the 1972 blaxploitation film for a new graphic novel called Blackula: Return of the King. Barnes is a writer and producer with TV credits for The Boondocks and Everybody Hates Chris, and comics such as Philadelphia. He's also earned top honors from the Peabody Awards, American Film Institute, Writers Guild of America, and NAACP Image Awards. He'll be appearing on a panel about horror at Black Comics Day on February 12th. So I thought it was the perfect time to sit down with him to discuss his career and horror. Even as a kid, Rodney Barnes was attracted to the idea of tackling Blackula and remaking it to allow the character to develop in new ways. Barnes will be appearing on a panel called Get Shooked, the New Masters of Horror, with fellow writers John Jennings and Kevin Grievous. All three will have stories in a new horror anthology coming out called Shook. So I'm doing a 3-part podcast featuring each writer. I need to take one quick break, and then I'll be back to speak with Rodney Barnes about horror, all kinds of vampires, and juggling a multi-hyphenate career.
Blackula, Dracula's soul brother, from American International Pictures.
KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more, Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Welcome back to Cinema Junkie. Today we're going to sit down with Rodney Barnes, whose latest work is Blackula: Return of the King. But Barnes is a prolific artist who's navigated a career that encompasses TV, comics, and film. So I wanted to know, how do you juggle all that?
It's a good question. When I get up at 3 a.m. to juggle those three things, I ask myself the same question. I think a lot of it had to do with the order of how those various worlds opened for me opportunity-wise. I wanted to be a comics writer first. That's what I tried, but I wasn't able to get that door to open. And so I made my way to Hollywood, and what I'm known for primarily is being a television writer, and that was the door that opened first. And then I started doing movie rewrites as well. And so those two worlds were primarily what I was known for and how I, kind of keep a roof over my head. And then probably 2/3 into my career, I got an opportunity on the TV show Runaways, the Marvel show Runaways, and made it known that if the opportunity were ever to become possible, I'd love to write a comic. And the powers that be from Marvel Television connected with Marvel Publishing and said, hey, we've got this guy, we like what he does, maybe you should give him a shot. And they did with The Falcon, and that was my first comic book opportunity. And it went okay, but it opened the door. And once that door was open, I sort of continued to knock on it, and more opportunities came, and so on and so forth. So the comics world, like virtually the other two as well, are difficult to maintain and to make a living off of. So you sort of make a commitment with yourself that once you're in it, if you love it, you just have to figure out a way to keep going. And I love it, so I keep going.
And what was it about comics that you were so attracted to and made you want that as kind of your primary outlet for your creativity?
When I was a kid, my mother, and this was way before computers and all of that, she was a school teacher. And when she would do her lesson plans, she would go to the public library and she would put me over in the pen where they would keep the kid books, the baby books. I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I was never really attracted to like Dr. Seuss or Curious George or any of those books. And I knew where, I don't know how I was drawn to them, but like a weather vane to water, I knew where the comic books were. Don't know how, don't know why, but there was this box full of comic books. And there was something about, I don't know if it was like the graphic storytelling, superheroes, whatever it was, and mostly it was Neil Adams' artwork. And Neil Adams is like a legendary artist in the medium. And it was something about it that just grabbed me and wouldn't let go. And I started to love going to the library because I wanted to see these books. And for a while, I thought this was the only place where they had comic books. Like I wanted to come back here again and again and again. And fell in love with the idea of superheroes. And it made me want to read. It made me understand story in a very primitive way, but it made me understand story. Like I knew what was going on in the stories in a more mature kind of way, like good versus evil and all of this stuff. And so a love affair was born. And in a weird way, as I was getting older, comics evolved. And they went from the sort of, if you remember the Adam West Batman, pow, bam, like Kitty, as my grandfather would call them, funny books. It became more mature and more evolved, the storylines and the themes from those Batman superhero stories to Alan Moore's more evolved Watchmen and V for Vendetta and Neil Gaiman's Sandman stories, which would walk with mythology and that type of stuff. And this was happening as I was getting older. So comics were becoming more mature as I was becoming more mature. So there was a reason to keep this connection going as I was moving through life. And so it just stayed. And as I became a professional writer, it sort of was a natural evolution to want to sort of make them now instead of just being a fan.
And you are going to be on a panel called Shook, which does focus more on horror. So what is the attraction of the horror genre, and what do you feel you can do within horror that maybe you can't do elsewhere or that just attracts you?
Well, in the comic book space, I think if there's a name that I've made for myself, it's mostly as a horror writer. My biggest book in the horror space independently is called Philadelphia. It's for Image Comics that I write and created along with Jason Sean Alexander, who illustrates the book. And I also have another book out right now called Blackula, who is from the legendary blaxploitation character from my own company, Zombie Love Studios. I always felt like in a horror space, African-American culture was never really represented on an equal footing. I grew up loving the Hammer films and the Universal monsters, and I never really saw that representation until, a little bit with the blaxploitation films, but never really until now. We're getting into this sort of Renaissance period with Jordan Peele films and maybe here and there in different places, Lovecraft Country, even though that's as much fantasy as anything else. And so when Shook came along, it was like this was an opportunity to work with a bunch of accomplished writers to, lend my services, guys who've written horror before and love it like I do as well, and hopefully add something substantive as well to their works and hopefully do some quality stuff.
Talk about Philadelphia just for people who may be not familiar with what it's about.
The primary storyline in Philadelphia, I think the thing that probably stands out above all others, is there's a father-son relationship. It takes place in Philadelphia. The father is a homicide detective who is on the trail of a serial killer. He gets killed in that process. His son, who is he's estranged from his father. He's a Baltimore beat cop, comes home to close out his father's affairs, finds his father's journal, reading his father's private thoughts and notes. His father was keeping notes about this serial killer. Comes to find that his father believed that the serial killer was a vampire. and thinks his father was crazy, but wants to one-up his father since his father's dead, and decides to close out the case that his father, or solve the case that his father couldn't solve. Goes down that rabbit hole and comes to the same conclusion that maybe this is indeed a vampire. But if my father was killed by a vampire, there's a good chance that my father is a vampire too. He digs up his father, opens up the coffin, spoiler alert, and his father says, "What took you so long?" And the two of them now are on the trail of a vampire serial killer who happens to be John Adams, the second president of the United States, who's looking to overtake America and change it into the face of what the founding fathers at one point hoped America would be, and not the oligarchical dynamic it has become.
And then you are returning to vampires in a very different way with Blackula.
Blackula, he thirsts for your blood. He hungers for your soul.
What was the attraction of kind of going back to this 70s blaxploitation film? William Marshall was great as Blackula.
Vampires, I think they're possibly the most fascinating of all.
So what kind of themes were you hitting differently within that vampire genre?
Blaxploitation in general, if you look at it, there's a romantic aspect to blaxploitation in the sense that it was the first time you saw Black actors carrying the narrative in a lot of different genres. But a lot of times they didn't have great scripts or great budgets, and they had to make the best of what they had to work with. And so there were some really, really cool ideas in Blackula, but there were some problematic elements as well. And I think William Marshall and some of the other actors in there were really great actors, and they made the best with what they had. And so even as a kid, when I saw the movie, I always said, if I ever had the chance to do this again, I would take out this, I would do that, I would change some things around. And underneath blaxploitation, there was this subversive idea of what was happening in society. That was like the civil rights movement and the Pan-African movement. There was this feeling of revolution that was under all of them, with the afros and the fashion and the music, and just there was this tone that was there. And if you look at what's happening in American society right now, there's a similar thing with the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the things that are happening within our society at this moment. It might not be as cohesive, but there's still an element of discourse within our current dynamic. And so I felt like if there was a way to speak to a little bit of what's happening today and build a bridge between yesterday and today, there was a way to make some really cool ties between the past and the present.
Your version of Blackula has not come out yet. I haven't had a chance to read it. But the film had some interesting layers to it in terms of history that kind of gave Blackula a very different kind of context than what the Dracula legend that Bram Stoker had created was.
Yes.
So how is that kind of playing out in your comic?
Well, you know, in the movie, and that was the thing that I dug about it the most, the idea that you enter with is Prince Mamuwalde comes to Count Dracula, who is a dignitary, and says, you know, he doesn't know he's a vampire. And he says, can you help us stop the slave trade?
Slavery has merit, I believe.
Merit? You find merit in barbarity?
Barbarous from the standpoint of the slave, perhaps. Intriguing and delightful from mine. I would willingly pay for so beautiful an addition to my household as your delicious wife.
Sir, I suddenly find your cognac as distasteful as your manner. You're behaving like some animal.
Really?
Really?
Let us not forget, sir. It is you who comes from the jungle.
Our evening is finished. I pray you arouse your coachman. We are leaving.
I do not think so.
Instead of helping him, you know, Count Dracula says, not only am I not going to help you, I'm going to turn you into a vampire and kill your wife and all these bad things. And I'm going to slap this name on you, Blackula, and you're cursed forever. And then the movie makes this turn into, now you're going to be this predator, and I'm going to send you, you're going to ironically end up in South Central, and you're going to start biting people. And you're going to have this pristine cape on, and your afro is going to get bigger every time you become feral, and you're going to be this cool guy. That beginning idea of him with Dracula and the politics that are under that, I always thought was really cool and something that could be built off of. And I sort of get into that place. I sort of go from there in his revenge on Dracula, and sort of being haunted by the idea with my vampires, both in Philadelphia and in Blackula, the part that's human, the faded memory, the echo of who you were as a human being still remains. It's like the body is almost like a prison. And even in immortality, you're haunted. Almost how I think trauma haunts us, the childhood trauma haunts us as adults, and we carry it through life. I think in my vampires, I try to do a similar thing. You're haunted by the idea of who you were as a human being, even though you have this thirst for blood, and you're going through. I always felt like the whole vampire mythos in movies, I know books have done it for a while, that you're kind of leaving a lot on the cutting room floor of just having this entity want blood. And I know there have been a million different ways to do vampires. Some do karate, some are really cool, some go to the sexy store and get leather and dance. But to be able to get into more of a psychological thing, with the Anne Rice ones have done that at times as well. And I love those. And I love the new AMC show as well. I try to go more into that path of a psychological, spiritual thing, of where we're haunted by the people that we were and the things that we've become, and it's hard to really shake the people that we are. And because I think oftentimes we wrestle with life, and we wrestle with the people that we are, trying to overcome ourselves. And being a monster and having immortality, kind of like being rich, doesn't help you overcome yourself.
Now, something like Blackula taps into a little bit of history and a little bit of the real world, but you have a new book coming out, Crownsville,
yes,
which really sounds like it's tapping into kind of what I would call real world horrors that kind of feed into the horror genre. So talk a little bit about kind of how real things in the world that are horrific can feed into horror writing, and how you can kind of deal with those things.
Yeah, I think, a lot of your classic ghost stories come from real stuff and real history. And it's hard sometimes because certainly when you inject race into it, it becomes difficult sometimes because you don't want to exploit the idea of what people went through for entertainment purposes. So you have to add a degree of empathy into the storytelling in order to bring a purposefulness to it. But in the case of Crownsville, Crownsville is a real mental hospital, or is condemned now, but was a real mental hospital right outside my hometown in Annapolis, Maryland, one of the first Black mental asylums, where there are a couple thousand unmarked graves of some of the Black mental patients that were there. It's a ghost story of what happened to a lot of people who unfortunately were, and I want to say incarcerated there, because many weren't treated there. They were experimented on. It wasn't like when you hear the word hospital, you think treatment. You were treated to get better and to be released as a better version of yourself. But back during that period of time, many were exploited. And what happened was, I was always intrigued by this place. And I went and I spoke to a couple of people who worked there and some of the security staff, and they would tell me about things that they heard that went bump in the night, and buildings they wouldn't go into, and things that they saw. And it was intriguing to me because I like that kind of stuff. And so when I started to look at some of the case files of some of the people and things that they saw that correlated with things that they talked about, I was like, there's some stories here. And so when I looked at stories like The Shining, or stories that were sort of mired in history, I was like this sort of The Haunting of Hill House or some of the other classic ghost stories. It was like this walks right within the tradition of that. So why not take a stab at telling that type of story?
And it seems like doing something like that can also use comics or films or television to kind of open people's eyes
Yes.
to things that they may not know about. Because I know that like in Lovecraft Country, especially the TV version of it, there were things that were brought up that I think a lot of Americans are not aware of, or at least not aware of from a Black perspective.
Yes. I think certainly for Watchmen as well, which was another HBO miniseries, a lot of people didn't know about the Tulsa race riots, or that in World War II, when, the Nazis were dropping leaflets to the Black soldiers, trying to get them to use racism as to why they shouldn't fight them, and little anecdotes about history that we don't get in the school system. History is such a hot topic right now, again, within the politics of today, that anytime you can invoke that type of subject matter within pop culture and within entertainment, it sort of adds, as you were saying, a little more of some layers to it. It makes it a little more substantive as just sort of disposable fast food type throwaway entertainment. And so it's fun, when it works and it's good and people, it gives them something satisfying. But it also makes it the type of work that makes it feel like it's purposeful and makes you feel good about the work that you do.
Well, and it also seems that people can often be resistant to ideas or information that come at them in certain ways where it's more preached to them.
Like medicine.
Yeah, and when you do it through an artistic way or creative way, it seems like people are much more open to hearing some of those messages or getting some of that information.
Yeah, I think probably if you present someone with a 1,000-page book and you say, here, this is all the history you need to know, a lot of people probably wouldn't read that book. But if you make it a TV show with the music and actors and all of this humor in it and some things that sort of make it easier, you can kick back in your chair with some popcorn, probably got a better chance of having people digest it.
You are going to be at Black Comics Day here in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the panel itself and your co-panelists? Like, do you have any idea what kind of ground you might cover, or what are you looking forward to possibly talking about?
I don't know. I just look forward to sitting there. I know Kevin Grievo and Keithan, and my good friend, the legendary John Jennings, is on there. I look forward to sitting next to him. And I think everyone just being able to sit there with a bunch of guys who do what it is that you do, talking about this subject matter. I mean, I really appreciate it. I had fun writing the story that I wrote the last March. Unique story. I don't know how much I can talk about it. It hasn't come out yet, so I'm afraid to give any spoilers. But I've seen a lot of the work. I think it's a beautiful book. I look forward to folks to see it, and I look forward to being there at the panel and talking to everybody.
And this is being crowdfunded, correct?
It is being crowdfunded. I think it's closed now.
And what is it? I mean, I'm just curious, like, it seems like there's more avenues for artists to get their work done and out there. And by having a project like this crowdfunded, do you feel that it gives you guys a lot more freedom to kind of create exactly what you want?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think anytime it's one of the reasons why I started my own company as well. It's like anytime you don't have to ask someone for permission to do a thing, and you can just sit down and create however you want to create and tell your truth. Just that idea of expression in and of itself doesn't mean it's going to be more tawdry or more bold if it were to come from a different publisher. But there is an idea of freedom that represents what all of this is supposed to be about. And I think when you talk about Black creatives coming together in an idea of making something that's honest, you would like to think that they had a free, open hand at doing this. I mean, literally, that's what I had. When the guys reached out to me, when John and, Bradley, and they all just were like, would you be willing to write a story? And I'm like, sure. It's like, all right, can you make it 12 pages? Sure. All right. How long do you think it'll take? A couple, week, two. Okay. All right, get it back to us. I mean, literally, that was it. And no one said, like, I'm writing a couple of stories, like I do The Mandalorian for Marvel and Lucasfilm. A lot of notes, a lot of notes. And nothing wrong with notes. I get notes from everywhere else that I work, but literally, I turned my story in and artwork was sent back to me. And that's not to disparage anyone who does give notes, but there is this thing when you look at the nature of what the goal is when you're talking about speaking about a subject, when you're talking about race and you're talking about horror and you're, putting those two subjects together, there's a certain sensitivity that's involved. I can see if I were to be with some publishers that they might be a little sensitive about that idea, what you might say, or that could be problematic. But being able to have a free and open space to be able to create what you want, say what you want to say, to see the final product, I think is a beautiful thing. And I think it speaks to how far we've come as a society and also as a comics community to be able to be in a place where you can just make a thing, and for us to be able to have this conversation and to have created a book that I'm proud to be a part of.
And you mentioned getting artwork back for what you'd written. Talk a little bit about how you work with an artist, and do you kind of let them have kind of a go at it first, or do you like to give a lot of instruction in terms of like, hey, this is how I kind of see this looking? What kind of a relationship do you have with those artists?
I email a script to an artist. That's it. I said that's I wish I could say no, you move this to the no. I email a script to an artist. I would never. I know nothing about art other than to say it's pretty. I mean, in the world of comics, the thing that I respect the most, as much as my name goes first, and writers get the lion's share of credit for stories, and I understand that part. The bulk of the work, to me, and the thing that I'm most in awe of, are the artists, because they create the world, they create the palette, they take you to the place, they physically take you to the place. I might be the tour guide, but they are the ones that create the world. So I would never insult an artist in telling them what I think that they should do as far as art is concerned. If they're there and the editor hired them and they believe in them, and I signed off and said, that's cool, I believe in them too. And, in this case, and then really all of the cases I've been blessed to be in from the beginning of my career to this point, been blessed with some incredible artists to work with. And so, no, I don't really put my 2 cents in very much. Sometimes someone will say, what do you think of this color scheme? Or what do you think of this, just for like my opinion on something? But as far as graphic storytelling is concerned, I might say splash page here because I want the effect of turning a page and you want the shock of that thing. Like, I'll lead you there within the script. But as far as the actual look of a thing and all of that, no, I let the artists do their thing, and God bless them.
Have you ever been surprised by what they come up with? Like,
I'm always surprised. They always top everything that I do. There's never been a time when this is not a real word. That's the funnest part of what I do is you write these words. I have a script in front of me for my book Monarch that comes out in February for Image Comics. Shameless plug for issue 5. And I never know when I'm putting these words on a page what's going to come back. I know what's in my head, but you never know what the art. And it's funny, it's a cheat in a way, because I'll say, for instance, Alex Lynn is the artist for this book, and I'll say something like, it's an alien and the alien's going to a world. And I'll say something like, we're on this planet and we're at the top of a vast mountain, and he looks out into this world that is a myriad of colors and shapes and sizes that looks like the Amazon rainforest or something like that. That was 12 words. And what comes back is a sprawling universe, that this person has sat down for days and drawn and crafted and colored and whatever. I'm going to get credit for that. But this person, with all of this talent, drew this masterpiece of art. So, who am I to come in and say, no, that tree should be to the left? No, I would never do that.
And you mentioned earlier that there's something of a renaissance in Black horror going on right now. Mm-hmm. So does this panel feel particularly appropriate? And do you feel like we are at a moment where there's an opportunity for more of these kind of films and books and TV shows to come out?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, the whole thing and the beauty of panels like this and conversations like this and just conventions in general and things like this is it's a way to get us all together and talking about this so that the world knows that we all exist. Creatives, Black men, Black women, that we know we exist, that we form alliances and that we're able to support one another. And, across the board, certainly in general, comics creatives, not just of color in general, but in particular, if that matters. I want everyone to be able to be supported. But I do think that there's an emphasis in the moment that there's so many stories that haven't been told that we can uniquely tell. And I love being able to see, I had this moment when I was writing Philadelphia, and my daughters came in the room one day and they were watching me write, and I'd gotten my comps in for a previous issue. And I was flipping through and I was looking at the art, whatever, and my daughter looked over and said, "What do you think?" So it's pretty, but it was an unenthused pretty. It was like you were saying it because I happen to be sitting here and I'm their father and I pay for them to go to school. And I was like, "What?" I was like, "No, it's really pretty, Dad." And I said, there's something there. And he said, "Well, it's no girls." And I didn't think about it. There weren't any girls. And it wasn't like purposefully I said in my mind, I wasn't going to put any girls. I just hadn't thought about it. It's like there's this whole John Adams, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. There's this guy thing and father and sons crying in each other's arms as they bleed and this thing. I hadn't thought about it. And so I created another book because my daughter said that in my ear that day, Nita Hawes' Nightmare blog, that's centered on a female protagonist, because my daughter said that in my ear that day. And again, I'm sure that had I not been a me and I were a woman, that would have been something that may have been at the forefront of my mind. And so it needs to be more than me is the point. There needs to be women, there needs to be people of other groups, there needs to be people across the spectrum who see things from different points of views and can add those points of views to the conversation. And there needs to be groups, cons of all types of people, rainbow colored cons that everybody gets together within their groups that speak to them. And then we all need to come together and have our groups speaking to one another. And so I think it's a beautiful thing.
Well, I want to thank you very much for talking about your work and about the upcoming Black Comics Day.
Thank you for talking to me, and hope to see you there and get you a black.
That was Rodney Barnes. His new graphic novel is Blackula, Return of the King. He'll be appearing at Black Comics Day on Sunday, February 12th for the panel Get Shooked, the new Masters of Horror. I'll be back tomorrow with my interview with John Jennings, who's a fellow panelist. That wraps up another edition of KPBS listener-supported Cinema Junkie. Remember to check out Cinema Junkie's archives, including a collection of podcasts highlighting Black films and filmmakers over the past century. You can find videos and more podcasts at kpbs.org/cinemajunkie. If you enjoy the podcast, then please share it with a friend, because your recommendation is the best way to build an addicted audience. You can also help by leaving a review. Till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by the San Diego County Toyota dealers, presenting a new 2025 Tundra designed to combine performance and comfort with up to 437 horsepower and 10-speed automatic transmission. See your Toyota dealer. The San Diego County Toyota dealers. We make it easy.